Claude MD, permissions, plan mode, skills, hooks, plugins, MCP, you name it. Everything to truly personalize Claude code and get the best results out of it. With this deeper understanding of Claude code, you can master agentic engineering. But the most important thing when working with Claude Code, again, is that the model is stateless. It has no in-session memory, no memory between the calls. Every time we call the model, it essentially starts from zero. Yeah, so it's up to the harness to provide all the state. So everything, your files, your conversation history, your entire setup, your environment, that's all Claude Code. But how does Claude Code give that? So just to kind of go back to our prompt, behind the scenes, like the moment you press enter, Claude Code assembles all of this data into one big request, into one big assembled prompt. So way more than we just have. That's only in the command. That's good to know. Again, the model cannot run that. The model will just send it back to the harness, but we'll see that in a moment. Then we also have the system prompt, and this is just hard-coded into Claude reasoning. It sees the entire assembled prompt. It's like, well, the user wants to add a test in utils.ts, but nowhere in our assembled prompt have we added this file yet. So it can't do anything. But what it does see is that in our tool schema, we have a read tool call. So it does understand, like, okay, if I don't have access to something, then just use this read tool call. So the response of the model here, or the API, is an assistant message with this tool call. And in your network, you might see like tool use. And this again is a hint to the harness that it wants to read this file. So this starts that first message. So only now, when the API has responded, will it show that read tool call in your mission mode. You know, we're kind of telling Claude like, hey, don't code anything yet, don't touch anything. But I kind of want to remember that loop diagram back where the model emits a tool call and then the harness executes it. But how do we know that what it's executing is actually stuff that we want? So in our Claude settings JSON, we can also define specific permissions. And I have this pretty early on in the workshop because I do think it's important that you understand the control you can have over Claude Code and make sure that it won't run anything that you don't want running on. There's often like a lot of workflows or a lot of steps that we want to take in Claude Code, and we kind of want to do it multiple times. And in that case, we can use skills. So a skill is just a markdown file with a specific procedure. So something you'd otherwise have to like re-explain to Claude every time. It's just repeated, multi-steps. And in this case, it's just specific to our project. So this could be anything like deployment or integrations, a Q&A loop, anything that you want to do multiple times, but you just don't want to keep typing the same prompt over and over. So actually, before I start typing it myself, a really nice prompt that I like to use is skill creator. I believe this is built into Claude Code. Sometimes I add different plugins to my environment, and then I forget whether this was built in or if I added it. I believe this one is built in. And this one makes it super easy to add your custom skills. So for this one, let's say, what skill would you like to have worked on? I might just do like a very simple like code reviewer skill. I don't want to do too much. I just want to see what it ends up with. Also, what I want to show here is like if you have a question or an example, the first thing that should come to your mind is like, has Claude Code already automated this? Or do I really have to go into the code base and code it myself? For a lot of these questions, you could just ask Claude and let it do it for you. So it's kind of like updating your mindset is like, how much of my daily life can I Claudify that way? And the nice thing also is that we have a lot of configuration options within.
A lot, and the idea, where you're telling Claude what you want to build rather than how to build it. So YK, what made that shift for you, and what made you start, sharing that?
First of all, there are many different terms for it, but I personally like this term because to me, it's not about the exact prompt. Sometimes people say, oh, use this prompt and you get better results. Sure, maybe. But to me, it's more about expressing what your intent is exactly, knowing what your intent is exactly what you want to build, and then just being able to express it. So one thing I recommend that people do is using your voice to type instead of using your hands to type. And one way where it's better is, so that you can express your intent faster. You might make mistakes. You might say, but it doesn't matter as long as you're able to. And as you may have noticed, it's helpful to start with broader questions first and then dig deeper as you go. So these might be questions like, what architecture should I use? What libraries, frameworks should I use? And then sort of go back and forth with the agent to refine your idea over time. And I'm confident enough of this model that it knows enough for this particular. There are a few different ways to go about it. As I just showed, you can directly verify the behavior of the app, not necessarily the code, but you can also check the code yourself if you want. And you can also automate, the process of verifying the output as much as possible by writing tests and by writing GitHub Actions and things like that. It's much better, vague, but as long as your intent is clear enough, that I found that Claude is able to figure out what I mean, even if there are like typos or transcription mistakes. It's basically
allow list. So auto mode runs a different classifier between all the tool calls. So it kind of thinks like, okay, is this tool call dangerous, first of all? If yes, okay, let's ask the user if they actually want to do it. But if it's just a normal like read or edit or something else, then no, that's not dangerous in most cases. And let's not ask them, let's not bother them. Another thing also is that it's much better against prompt injection. In some cases, a tool call might just be like, ignore all instructions, that kind of stuff. Because it runs a classifier in between, it's much better at catching that. Also, another nice thing is that it's more context dependent. Like if you're asking Claude, delete this folder, in some cases that RMRF might be dangerous, but if you've specifically asked for it, it's not dangerous. So in those cases, Automode won't ask you because you asked to delete it. It's not a dangerous thing. So this is a very nice way of working, and this actually enables you to use Claude code or to run Claude code way more autonomously in these longer running sessions. But anyway, so far we haven't done anything. Aren't new. If you've used Claude Code, you may have noticed that sometimes it spawns a new sub-agent to perform a certain task. A sub-agent is essentially another Claude Code instance with its own context, and it's really good at just like focusing on that specific task. But if you're just asking Claude every time to like use sub-agents, you don't even have to ask it. The downside is that it's very non-deterministic. Sometimes it might spin up 4 sub-agents, sometimes it might not even use sub-agents. The other time it uses 10 sub-agents, all that kind of stuff. With workflows, it's kind of our deterministic solution to that. Workflows also spin up a lot of sub-agents, and that's a feature. It can go into hundreds of sub-agents because like this is a feature for tasks that takes hours or days or like these really long-spanning tasks. But the nice thing is that Claude Code actually generates a JavaScript file. And we'll see that in a moment as it's like eventually it will kick off the workflow. But you can see that JavaScript file and you can save the workflow to then rerun it later on as a / command. So if you really like a specific kind of steps that Claude Code took with specific sub-agents, you can save it and rerun it in that very deterministic way. And because all these sub-agents run in parallel, you can also achieve a lot more within usually the same amount of time as a single sub-agent would have because it's parallel. And what you'll see is Claude is pretty smart at like kind of delegating these sub-agents to be very focused on a specific task. Okay, so just like a cooking show, I figured that Claude would take a while to kind of spin
code, where you kind of note that code generation models have a bias towards writing more code than needed. So how do you kind of balance the rapid prototyping with the discipline of actually keeping things clean?
So I think in general, they have had that tendency over time, but it really depends on the particular model that you're using. And depending on that, it might be able to generate concise code. But the general principle that I try to convey through this particular tip and other tips on this repo is that you want to be in control of the code, not necessarily like totally in control, micromanage everything, but in a way to make sure that your code quality is good, your output quality, the behavior is correct, and all of that. So I would say just in general, don't necessarily commit all the code that's generated. Make sure that you only commit and merge the ones that are important and valuable to your code base, and you need to be the decider of that.
So Lydia, with agents writing more and more code, what does understanding your code base actually look like in 2026? So, and how do developers try to stay in the driver's seat?
Yeah, the way I see it is I think the role of a software engineer is changing more to be almost like a product manager. At least that's what I've noticed. And also it feels pretty logical. Like as a software engineer, you're not just writing the code, but you are in charge of owning it, understanding the architecture that you want to build. And it's still up to you to kind of understand why we need to implement a feature, all that kind of more like product manager stuff, but we still definitely need the technical expertise, almost with the intentional design that YK mentioned. Is still very important. I always like to kind of draw a comparison to like, I can write TypeScript or JavaScript, but I'm not going to focus on the machine code that gets generated afterwards. And it's almost like, it's almost pretty similar where it's like software engineering used to focus on the actual code syntax, almost like, you know, how machine code might have mattered. But we're going a layer above that now. I think what's more important is understanding the architecture, understanding the feature, and understanding still what the shortcomings are. But then also building the right environment for Claude around it with hooks, permissions, CloudMD file, that kind of.
It's a tool. So I'm not sure if this is the right analogy, but you know, it's sort of like as a painter, instead of using a regular brush, you're using an electric automated brush. So you're responsible for the output. That's the first thing I really want to emphasize, because I get frustrated by this kind of discussion whenever I read it. You know, people say, "Oh, you know, people produce like so much code, and it's not good with AI in general, not just Cloud Code." And I say, okay, don't produce it then. Like, don't push it. Like, as I said, there are so many ways to review code, make sure it's good before it goes into production. You know, if it's like a one-time vibe coding kind of casual project like the game I built, that's totally fine. You don't have to check the code. But if it's more of a serious production, you know, code base that you want to really be secure and safe about, then, like I said, create a draft PR, make sure it's good, review it manually or with AI. If you generate 100,000 lines of code, you don't have to commit 100,000 lines of code. It's not necessarily the way it is. You know, just commit what you think is right. And at the end of the day, you're responsible for the tool and the output.
Yeah, I can also only agree with that. I feel like you still need to verify, and like you're really good at this. Like having that verification layer, I think, is still very important. But this is also important when you handwrite code. But it's definitely true that I think when you handwrite it, you like 90% of the review process happens as you're writing it. I think with Claude Code, we've kind of shifted from like 90% coding to 10% review, because like as you were doing it, you were already reviewing. With Claude Code, it's like 90% coding or 90% you have to review it, and 10% maybe like hand coding the changes. So there's definitely a lot more like importance in the reviewing phase now. And I feel like a lot of people have yet to kind of shift their mindset towards that, where it's like, no, you have to review more. You can also automate that, and you definitely have to make that as easy for you as possible with like, you know, permissions and hooks and all of that stuff, just to make sure Claude was sort of following your design spec already. But it's definitely more important now than ever to be a good reviewer and verify that the changes for sure.
In the digital world, you use it for video editing, data analysis, storage cleanup, research, writing, etc. So, and you said you even saved $10,000 using it for research. So can you unpack that? And is a terminal really becoming the new everything?
Yes. So the research thing, I can definitely touch on that. But I think in general, I find it interesting how the computer started in the terminal. The computer just used to be, you know, the terminal, that was the whole UI. But then we got these different GUI apps and stuff like that. But now we're back on the terminal, which I find pretty exciting. So I use it pretty much for everything, like, you know, research. If I want to go through like a bunch of Reddit threads and kind of find what the community is saying about a certain thing, I might like copy and paste it manually, or I can just, you know, let Cloud Code handle it, you know, fetch information from different sources. So I find that super helpful for that. On this particular case about like saving $10,000, that's entirely true. I guess I can share a little bit more about it. Basically, I was in the process of, you know, buying a property, and I wanted to find a good realtor. I didn't want to, you know, find it myself, so I had Cloud Code basically compile a list of realtors, and I really specifically said, hey, give me a list of email addresses give it to me, comma separate it so I can like write the email and email them directly. And that's how I was able to essentially, at the end of the day, save $10,000.
Lydia, Claude Code is clearly being used for, more than just
image manipulation, for example. Like I always had to go to like a website to do that, or maybe use like specific software. But with Claude Code, I don't have to use that software anymore. I'll just ask it like, hey, please convert it to MP4. Maybe like, reduce the volume a little bit. We edit a lot of our own videos just using Claude Code in the CLI. We generate, simple like audio samples, all that kind of stuff. So it's really like the bottleneck now is just your imagination. Claude Code can do pretty much anything on your computer at this point.
All right, let's hop into the rapid fire round. I'm going to read out a statement.
Still depend on Claude Code. So I feel like it's Claude Code for both of us then.
Thanks for watching. Everything that you've seen in this video is going to be linked in the description box below, from YK's repository on Claude Code tips, as well as documentation showing you how you can run Claude Code on Google's Agent platform. To watch more Agent Factory content, check out this next video on how you can run Agent CLI on Agent platform, as well as learn more about ADK 2.0. I'll see you in the next one.